Why do you think so many people self-diagnose with ADHD?
Oh, TikTok. Well, we all are crazy, just throw that out there. And we all have attention deficit of some sort because, number one, life. And then we're like, oh, gosh, I saw this TikTok or I saw this message online, and all of a sudden it makes so much sense to me now. And granted, yes, some of you do need that stuff and you do need to watch it, and it's opening up the doors for those conversations. But what's happening is they're self-diagnosing and not going to the doctor and actually being formally diagnosed. And so they go around like, oh yeah, I'm ADHD, and it's become almost like this blanket of normal.
Right. And that's the thing I think that is a big struggle, especially if you are diagnosed ADHD, is people are like, well, that's everybody. You're not really, the ADHD doesn't exist. Does ADHD exist?
Absolutely, it exists. And I say that with all sincerity because I know that a neurotypical brain compared to a neurodivergent brain is way different. A neurodivergent brain thinks differently, it's shaped differently, it releases different chemicals, the same chemicals, but it releases them differently. Whereas a neurotypical brain, which someone who doesn't have autism, ADHD, or any of those types of things, they think more linear, where we think like a roller coaster.
Right.
And that's the best way to say it.
Yeah.
So neurotypical is more, okay, and then throw in our emotions because we're emotional. So not only are we sometimes just not logical because we don't think in a straight line, we ride a roller coaster, and then we throw in those emotions, and emotion's going to override logic every single time, and so we have to kind of back it down. And that's why it's so great to be diagnosed, because that medication, if you're into medication, if you're not, that's fine, but even though if you are diagnosed, you can find techniques to back it down and we're not so emotional.
Right. And what are some of the common diagnoses that people think they're ADHD, but they're actually something else?
PTSD.
Really? Why?
Because PTSD is an umbrella, and PTSD, I don't want you to think of it as an umbrella, but also has these little mobile things hanging down. We have anxiety, we have depression, we have hypersensitivity. So we have all of these things that mimic ADHD, but really it's PTSD. And if you think about it, PTSD is not a soldier's disease, and people are like, the old timers, it's becoming more normalized now, but they're like, oh, I wasn't a soldier. So many of my clients are like, but I've never been to war. Okay, but there's still trauma there. You can have big T trauma, which is, something significant, huge, life-altering, or you can have little T trauma. If you lived through COVID, we've all had some sort of traumatic experience, and everybody has that. I don't want to call it PTSD from COVID, but we all have some trauma there because we didn't know if we were going to live or die.
Right.
And so we've all experienced it, and that's starting to come into play really heavy right now. But most of the common symptoms and common, I guess, comorbidity would be PTSD for me.
Makes sense. If you guys haven't followed Dr. Stephanie, she is tagged down below. Amazing therapist. I refer a lot of people to her. Get into therapy. Trust me.